turbulent background sky. That is something that we are looking for here. So let's do that one more time with the dry mode. Okay, so let's produce, in fact, let's see 99 of them or 100. I'll explain why later. There you go. Let's uncheck the dry run and go. All right. So now I'm going to store that animation, store. Now before I do that, let's check one thing. The last frame is identical to the first frame, or the first frame is identical to the last actually. That's, I don't know, some side effect of the algorithm. It puts the last one back into the first one. I don't know if that's a bug or not, but we can live with it. I'm just going to delete that first frame, and now I have the animation the way I envisioned, and you can see how that's moving. Okay, so one thing I want to do now is store that to disk as usual, and you could use this to simply displace the original image that it started with. Right, so you could say, well, let's go load this one or this one, the seamless one, and it's pretty much what it started from, but what you use now, you can use this as an animated swap, and as you scrub through that, this movement will be applied to this one. So this one here is simply going to be 99 frames of the same image, and this one is a movement that's displacing and moving as much, right? So it's not always the same, and therefore we can go, for instance, to displace here and say how much displacement we want. But because the background, these animated frames are changing, it's going to create sort of a movement in this entire chaos here. So I'm going to go apply that, and so you can see now that it's doing some magic on that as well. Right, so many different ways to create some fancy, interesting looking cloud patterns here, and we're not quite done. We're actually never done with this. Something I'll do here is I'll make it seamless again. Make seamless, perhaps a little bit more this way. And then once I have this seamless animation, I can, again, rotate it if I prefer to have a downdraft or an updraft, have the clouds moving up vertically mostly, because right now they're still going a little bit sideways diagonally as well. So if I want that to be showing more of an up movement, I certainly can arrange that simply by going to transform and make sure that I don't just rotate it, but I also tile it. Right? If you don't tile it, then, well, if you don't tile it, that helps you perhaps find the angle you need, but you can then tile it, and then that way the animation will appear to be moving mostly sort of in an up direction. And then there are other things that you might want to do here, perhaps some what else could we do here? A little bit of embossing, color emboss. That sometimes can be, that's too much, but you might find some of that interesting to give it a little bit more depth as well. And that one was on a single image, so if you want that on multiple frames, on all frames, you can probably find it under the timeline editor. There's a convolution color emboss, and there it is. So do something like that. And it's always good to have the save undo until you really know what you're doing, because you might want to undo and go back in time here. Alright, so we have here an animation that I think is going to be pretty neat for our dragon to walk across. It should still be seamless, although with the embossing we might have introduced a little bit of seams. Still, let's ignore that for now. We can always apply the make seamless again. What I want to do is store that again to disk so we don't waste too much memory. Keep in mind that it's a 32-bit application still, so we don't want to waste too much of the memory. What I want to do is now use this as the background. Right, and in fact what I'll do is I'll also add a little bit of a mystic vision glow or blur to that here. Under the blur menu, mystic vision, and apply something like this here. A little bit more, something like that. Right? So it looks like there's a big bright spot here somewhere below it or underneath it, something like that, and then apply that against the entire animation. Well, maybe that's not what we wanted. Let's just restore it back to that. And what I want to do really is just get our dragon back. Let's click the, I still have the brush here. Hopefully you saved it. By the way, we never did. So let's make sure I select it and then I store it. Not just store it in memory, but actually save it to disk, right? You can go to the brush menu and select more and then save animated brush. You should definitely do that. Especially if you put a lot of effort into building that with all the cropping and selection of the transparency parts and so on. So here is walking dragon anim brush. Now there's another place where you can store that. I think media, although I haven't actually experimented with that, so I'll first test that. But ideally you'd be able to go here and select it from there. I imagine that probably works too. So we have the brush, we can enable it, we can select the brush tool, we can preview it or show it. So now here's the dragon, and the dragon needs to move from the left to right. We've done this before. We can either use the simply brush it with the Alt key down, right? So if you go perhaps let's see, steps a little bit closer together, right? Something like this. Yeah, that'll be good. You can also zoom down a little bit with the thumb wheel on your mouse, and then simply go hold the Alt key down, and then that way. Oh, why is it not animated? Oh, I didn't have an animation on this one. Hold on a second. Oh, it is. It's just moving very slowly or not updating that there. Oh, that's odd. All right. Well, anyway, that's one technique to use. One other way that I certainly like a lot is to go with the brush keyframer. Right. So if I go to the animation brush keyframer, there we are, and I can now have him even bigger, or change the scale here. If you don't have to see him all, I can go from about here and keyframe that. And then go to the last keyframe and have him disappear. Maybe just a little bit of the tail is still visible. I know. Let's go outside of the view. And so now we have a path going like this. And there you go. All right. So let's go and render. And so that completes our animation composition here on a beautiful background sky. Alright, well, I think that's it for this initial set of episodes on creating animations, starting with Moho or Anime Studio, and then combining that with Howler in a couple of ways, depending on whether you have an alpha channel already or whether you don't. If you already had the alpha channel on that render image sequence, then you could load that into your anim brush with the alpha in place already, right? But what we saw is that we can actually reconstruct some of that in many cases quite beautifully. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.